Hi, everybody. Welcome to the latest Paddock Pass podcast and another Grand Prix review. David Emmett, does it feel like we're 14 rounds into the season, or is it round 400?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely sort of in the low six figures by now. So we're fortunately there's only another 7 trillion to go.
For those watching on YouTube, I'm Adam Wheeler, and you can probably tell that I'm on the ground here in the media centre in Balaton Park, and the sun is dipping down, so it's getting a little bit chilly now, actually. But I have my not erstwhile colleague, Neil Morrison, sitting about 3 tables in front of me. We're speaking through the delights of modern technology, Neil, so we can speak with Dave, who's been, burning the midnight oil in the Netherlands. But how are you faring, my Irish friend?
I'm doing okay, Ad. And you're giving away that we don't actually really like each other because we don't hang out in the media centre. There's 2 rows worth of tables in between us.
You sit with your posh Dorner friends. Ooh.
Well, it's also the baritone kind of, just infects every other recording around you, Neil. So it's like a 10-meter radius you need by yourself. That's it, really. We should have sacked off Saturday in the sprint, which, you really missed a classic there, Dave. If you would have gone to the motocross, yes.
Yeah, that's a good shout.
Listen, we've got plenty to talk about on this show. We got an exclusive interview with Pedro Acosta's crew chief, Paul Trevathan, and we're going to talk about some of the questions sent in by our Patreon listeners and viewers. And we're also going to go through some of our own talking points from this 14th round of the season and the first visit to Hungary since 1992. But first of all, Dave, as you were watching diligently through the screen, what was your moment of this Grand Prix?
My moment of the Grand Prix was, I think it was around lap 6 or 7 when Marc Marquez attacked Marco Bezzecchi, and Bezzecchi was brilliant. Bezzecchi did exactly what you have to do if you stand a chance of fighting against Marc Marquez, which is to take him straight back. It's something Marquez always did. It's something that, for example, Valentino Rossi always did. If you get past, you strike back immediately. It really sort of it gave you hope that perhaps this wouldn't be such a walkover, and it was just really heartening to see. It also shows, I think, Bezzecchi's class as a racer. He understands how to race. He's very aggressive in that sense. So and I really enjoyed it. Of course, it only lasted that sort of like 1 lap, and then Mark sat behind for 3 laps, and then the next time he attacked, he made sure he made it stick.
Yeah, there's plenty of value in your moment. It's just a shame it was so fleeting, Dave. I think is probably the main message there. My standout moment, it probably reflects a little bit the state of MotoGP at the moment. And it was the claim in the post-race press conference by Marc Marquez, after what his 7th win in a row, now on 10 victories for the season, that he hopes he won't have his first crack at the World Championship in 2025 in Misano, which will be, 5-6 rounds before the end of the championship, because that means his brother would have had a disaster at their home Grand Prix in Barcelona in 2 weeks. And I just thought, not only is Marquez calculating, which we kind of knew when he could win this title, but he's also thinking a little bit of his brother and the permutations there for what Alex Marquez does. I don't know. It just reflected a calculating mind, not a devious one. I mean, I think his comment was full of sentiment towards his sibling, but it just shows the extent of which Marquez is controlling this championship. And I think if he does wrap up in Misano, it'd be ridiculous. I mean, it's a statement and a half.
I think he also just felt really sorry for Alex, because Alex has just had a run of really miserable races. Because he did say, I don't want to do it in Alex. I don't want to do it in Misano because that means that Alex has had to have a miserable time. He needs to outscore Alex Marquez by 47 points over 2 races, which is very doable. But it does mean that Alex has to have a really, really bad, has to have a bad weekend. But I think it is more. It's likely to be Motegi, but it's not impossible for it to happen in Misano.
The whole world is so ridiculously thirsty to have it sewn up in Misano. I'm quite taken back by it.
Look, I want it done as soon as possible. I'd go for it in Barcelona if at all possible, just so we can get over it. He's waiting for the inevitable. He's waiting for the I don't know. It's waiting for the bailiffs to come because you haven't paid your bills.
Winning after he wins the championship, Dave.
Yeah, but at least I can just start ignoring it. I don't have to worry about him winning. I can just concentrate on sort of more interesting things that are happening behind it. Basically, Marc Marquez is he's at a track day, and they've put him in the slow group, and unfortunately, there's no one who can, there's no one else he can go against. So I can ignore him.
If Alex Marquez ends up being abducted for the Catalan round, then we have to check the movements of Moto Matters and find out what you've been up to, Dave. Neil, aside from discovering a very fine Mexican restaurant here near Balaton Lake, which ensured that you didn't go hungry in Hungary, what was your moment of the Grand Prix?
Well, I was rather pleasantly surprised to actually see some decent racing today in Moto3 and Moto2. It is fair to say, Ad, that both of us were slightly down in the dumps on Saturday. That was just turgid, really turgid. And I woke up this morning with a real sense of duty to be optimistic no matter what, a bit like Austria last week. And you know what? We ended up having a much more interesting day today than we did on Saturday. And I think the most interesting aspect of the entire day was the Moto2 race. And the last lap of the Moto2 race was an absolute thriller. We saw an almighty comeback from David Alonso, the reigning Moto3 world champion. This has been coming for a couple of races, but he's still not the complete Moto3 rider. Sorry, not the complete Moto2 rider just yet. He can't qualify brilliantly. He's not so good with the new tyre. Doesn't start very well. He said that he struggles with the kind of the physical size of a Moto2 bike because he is quite tiny and he struggles to keep the wheel down and leaning over the front of it. But once he got into his groove, he was picking riders off for fun, and just the timing couldn't have been better. He caught Manu Gonzalez on the last lap, made a brilliant move on him, and then went on and made a real mess of one of the chicanes just before the kind of the finale of the lap, and still just managed to hold on. But we almost had him, Moreira, and Gonzalez crossing the line in unison. It was really a tight finish, and David Alonso, first time winner in Moto2, and as we've said about this kid, since his earliest days in the championship, it's going to be the first of many.
Yeah, Alonso, very classy act, and he's got a very sort of heavily accented English, grasp of English, I should say. But he does explain. He's quite forthright with what he says. His comments are quite interesting. And, he said that, when it comes to starting on the Moto2 bike, he's even asked the team to turn down the power a little bit because he's just struggling to handle the bike away from the grid. So some mapping tweaks going on there, you'd have to imagine, by the CF Moto Aspar crew. But good shout, Neil. I mean, the Moto2 and the Moto3 races really laid on quite an appetizing spread, you could say, for the MotoGP race here in Balaton Park. Before we move on, the Paddock Pass podcast is backed by rental.com. Rental are superlative for their off-road components, but also for your street bike. If you have a road bike in the garage and you're after some new bars, clip-ons, grips, then head to rental.com, use the Fit My Bike tool to customize exactly what you need for what you have. So thanks to the guys at rental.com. Let's get straight into the winner. Dave, you pretty much said Marc Marquez is in a track day. I'm not too sure. To sum up, I think this was probably one of his easiest Grand Prix wins of the season. I mean, I don't think the result was in dispute. Even after that sort of wobble at turn 2, which put him back to third or fourth, Marquez just was able to bide his time and pick people off on a track that was supposedly impossible for overtaking.
What really is there left to say about Marc in 2025? 7th double victory in a row, his 14th win in a row. It's just kind of ridiculous to think that this winning run started in June. The start of June back at the Aragon GP, and we're nearly finished August, and it's still ongoing. You just kind of have the impression that he's gonna walk away from this year with like 16 or 17 feature race wins, isn't he? He's already on 10. We've got 8 races still to go. This was, you sort of look at the layout of this place, and it couldn't really be more in tune with Marc Marquez's strengths. It's anti-clockwise. There's tons of the kind of sharp, heavy braking zones. There's lots of like kind of low speed changes of direction. We know he's so good at that, and he's just coming here in one of the the best moments of his entire career. So it was really difficult to see any other outcome from the early stages of the weekend. To be fair, Pedro Acosta looked like he could maybe do something on Friday, but then he wrecked his qualifying. We'll come on to Acosta in a little bit. He kind of, I was going to say shat his spine out, but that's maybe a bit harsh in qualifying. But he definitely didn't build on the positive Friday on Saturday. Let's put it like that in a more diplomatic way. And yeah, Marc was just he was just cruising. And there was a bit where Bezzecchi started so well. I think he got his lead up to about 9/10 of a second after 2 or 3 laps, and then once Marc got past Morbidelli into second, just the way that he cut, like Bezzecchi's advantage was just like quite emphatic, and one was on his rear tire within 2 laps. So yeah, every now and again at the front he would just like dip into the 1:37s. Everyone was kind of in like the 1:38s, and he would just kind of occasionally throw a little 1:37 in there just to remind the rest of the field that he was absolutely in control of this. And I don't know about you, but when you watch him celebrate with his team, it's almost as if his team are getting a bit bored by it. There's not really that kind of same ecstatic, wild celebration that we saw at the start of the year.
Everyone's getting a bit bored of it. I mean, this is one of the reasons why you sort of hope he wraps it up as soon as possible, because that way he might relax a little bit. He might sort of,
that's even worse.
Well, but he might start making mistakes. He might start sort of like losing concentration. It was also very worrying that he said sort of, well, what happens when you win the championship, the 2025 championship? Well, start concentrating on 2026, which is not... he did go so far as to say, I'm not yet thinking about 2027. But again, that is really... rather depressing, really. And there was nobody. The only person who could match his lap times was Fermin Aldeguer, but at that point Aldeguer was about 14th or 15th, was so far behind that it didn't really make any difference. If you look at the fastest laps, I think people were doing low 38s, Bezzecchi, Acosta, and Marc was doing mid 36s. He was doing sort of 36 6s, 36 7s. He has so much in hand, it's just not real.
I went into the post-race press conference and I thought, I'm going to ask Marc if he thinks he's making MotoGP boring. Just a flashback to the I think Mick Doohan was asked a similar question, when he was just obliterating the 500cc class in the mid to late 90s. And he was actually one of the...
era.
It was. I mean, he was the first winner, wasn't he, in Hungary? The Hungarian.
That was his first ever win.
Yeah, his first ever win. So I thought, might just tie it up nicely. But when it came around to sort of like looking at Marquez and thinking, do I ask him this question? I was kind of reminded of this overarching narrative that he's making this great comeback, and it's hard to really point the finger at him and accuse him of making MotoGP not fast, but just very predictable and particularly unexciting. Because
7 in a row.
But this story, Dave, I mean, yeah, like you say, hurry up and get it done, man, so that we can all write about you and eulogize about your legacy, and then crack on with something else. But
and do it in Misano, and then we can watch you like sort of do a celebration and burnout in front of the VR46 Ducati box, and everyone in the world will just blow up and go absolutely wild.
Yeah, just set fire to all the bins in the paddock and create general havoc. Can you imagine a Marquez title party there? Could be particularly spicy, but
it is. Sorry, it is. I mean, resident statistician of the Paddock Pass podcast, TV Room Raccoon, was pointing out that in the first 5 weekends of the season, Alex outscored Marc by 1 point. In the last 5 rounds, Marc has outscored Alex by 135 points, which shows that Marc has been just utterly relentless, but also Alex's challenge has really faded away. And he was saying in the press conference after the race, I think it was the Aragon test, they worked on some things there. He worked on his ride, and it just seemed like everything, those last little tweaks that needed to be made to his riding style were just kind of found, and he found that like last 1 or 2%, and since then it's just been an absolute cakewalk. So yeah, fair play. There's nothing really more to say.
Yeah, on our Patreon channel, we've been doing our daily paddock note shows. As Neil kind of hinted, it was hard to whip up the enthusiasm on Saturday night, but we still got something out. Also through Patreon, we have our followers and we have a Discord channel. So we're interacting with people who are watching, listening to MotoGP all through the Grand Prix. And we invite questions, and we've had those in just in time for this podcast recording here in Hungary. And Dave, VJ asks, is Mark given 100%?
Good question. No, I don't think so. I think he's giving. I think
me neither.
Especially at the Balaton Park. He said so. He just felt really, really comfortable here. So that was him cruising. That was him giving sort of 95%, 96%. He was 93%. Not giving his. So I don't understand how I missed that one. But yeah.
Put it in a spreadsheet.
Exactly. No,
do you have a spreadsheet?
I might have.
Might have mentioned that once or twice before.
We had another question, a couple of questions in actually. Neil, Janice, Clayton, and Tara said, when will anybody be able to put up a decent fight against Mark? And do you guys think the MotoGP will be interesting again soon? I think we kind of tackled the second one, but we need Mark to win this thing and then go a little bit more crazy, I guess you could say, or go to 100%, trying to maybe humiliate people further. But any thoughts on the first one?
Well, if he's to be believed, which he isn't, because he was probably lying, but if you were to take him at face value in the press conference, Barcelona will be the next true test, because apparently that's just a terrible track for him. And to be fair, it is a really good track for Alex. It suits his kind of high corner speed style. But then I think back to the last race of last year when Mark really ran Pecco close on a GP23 when Pecco was on a GP24, really going for it to try and snatch the title away from Jorge Martin. So it doesn't necessarily fill me with so much hope. Oh, yes, I was so disillusioned with life. I called Jorge Navarro on our note show yesterday, and I was horrified whenever someone pointed this out to me because I was completely unaware of it at the time. You
Easy
didn't even correct me, Ad. Yeah, exactly.
I know. I didn't have the heart. I think I'd interrupted you in a debrief earlier, and I thought I'm not going to do it again.
Yeah, my explanation was just simply Moto E. I'll say no more. But yeah, and I mean, to answer the second question, I guess it depends on what you define as interesting. I mean, I thought today's race was quite interesting. I mean, there was lots of interesting things going on behind the winner. But if your definition of interesting is to have someone fighting with Mark up front, I mean, there are going to be races, definitely. Catalonia, I think, could be one of them. I think some of the overseas races could be quite interesting. Motegi and Indonesia were really good for Pedro Acosta last year, for example. And I think, on the back of this recent run, we'll come on to him in a wee minute, but on the back of this recent run he's been on, maybe those could be the places where Acosta can really go for it.
Yeah, I definitely think Barcelona is going to be a lot more difficult for Mark. However, like as Neil said, he said we've been at difficult tracks for him before, and he's cleaned up. But I actually think there is quite a lot of interesting things going on. Again, this is why I want him to win the championship soon, so we can start talking about it. Because KTM have made big steps. The Aprilia are looking fantastic. Jorge Martin is looking really, really impressive. There's a lot of things happening, but we're sort of ignoring it because we're just waiting for Mark to wrap it all up.
I do. I put out a tweet about this as well. I would like Ducati to give some clarification as well on what is going on with the GP 25, 24, exactly what Bagnaia is trying to fix, what they've given Marquez, because we had information as well across this weekend that Mark's bike is actually the one profiting most from the latest parts that Ducati are bringing. I mean, Bagnaia is trying to look backwards before, or so that he could go forwards. And Digia has his own issues with trying to get a stable base setup on that GP25 machine, and it seems that Marquez has a bit of an advantage that way. But people are saying different things, messages are getting mixed. It's hard to keep track of how level the playing field is when it comes to the machinery. So it'd be good if Ducati could just sort of put Dillingham in front of us and give some sort of debrief or some clarification on that. I don't know. I mean, has the Desmos Adichie become a Marquez machine? I guess that's one question.
Ducati don't give a shit. I mean, like they're looking at the results. Mark is leading. They're cleaning up. They're going to win the champion. They're going to win the Triple Crown again. They don't care. It doesn't matter.
So they tossed off the Italian golden boy. That's
Yeah,
what you're
don't
saying.
care. Look for the number one, and then look for the name next to it, and look to see what bike
Yeah.
they're riding, and that's it. That's the only thing they care about.
But will they go down a Honda alley, Dave, where they're making a motorcycle that only one person can really steer effectively? Or
Well,
maybe
they'll
we
go.
can come on to
They're
that in a
gonna,
moment, because the
yeah.
Ducati era is starting to not wobble, but there's maybe a little bit less invincibility about it. But just to listen, we'll get onto that in a moment. Just to finish off the Marc subject, as Neil mentioned, Catalonia Next is not his finest track in terms of results. Paul Espargaro was telling us in a debrief earlier in the GP that the grip level is worse than ever at the circuit, the Barcelona Catalonia. So that's really going to put like a cat amongst the pigeons and test tyre preservation to the max. It could be a little bit of an outlier, but then again, if Marquez does what he's done in the strongholds of Bagnaia, Assen 3 years in a row, I think,
Mugello.
Austria, Mugello, then there's no reason to suspect that the onslaught is going to continue. Neil, you mentioned Pedro Acosta. We should give him his dues. It's a second podium finish in 3 Grand Prix. Second place was his best ever. And, you said he had a great Friday. He kind of threw it into the gravel and had his team work into the early hours on Saturday. He trashed a special pair of front forks that he's been really liking, and but he still managed to sort of come through today. So the difference perhaps wasn't that great. What did you make of the KTM riders' performance?
Yeah, I mean, it's very easy. Friday, brilliant. Saturday, shit. Sunday, brilliant. And if you can just sort of Saturdays out, we're still yet to see a complete weekend from Acosta this year. I think you could say he really did look as though he could run with Marc on Friday. Maybe that was just Marc kind of holding back. I'm not sure. But he did look really, really strong. Then first flying lap in qualifying, bins it in spectacular style through that fast right, totals his bike, totals those WP front forks that he really likes and only has one set off and isn't able to run for the rest of the weekend. Then goes into the sprint, gets a bit unlucky with Fabio Quartararo taking himself out and having to lift up, and then just gets so frustrated behind Jorge Martin. I think when he's like out of the points, they're fighting for 10th, he ends up binning it, and you just think, what is going on with this guy? But he brought it back. He composed himself for today, and I do think he had a really, really strong ride from 7th. I mean, this is not an easy track to overtake on, as we know in a MotoGP machine, but he made strong early progress. And there was a moment when he was chasing down Bezzecchi when I thought for second, and I thought, this has got like sort of a Costa crash written all over it, but he remained very, calm, and we didn't see him doing anything kind of ragged or crazy. And he was just saying how some of the recent changes that KTM have made mean that the bike is nowhere near as critical when he's kind of pushing toward the limit than it was at the start of the year when he kept crashing out. So I think he did really well. You spoke to Paul Trevathan, his crew chief, and I spoke to him before the summer break, and he was just saying the way that the guy is able to sort of morph his riding style into what the bike needs from Friday to Sunday is just like so impressive. Sometimes you're looking at a different rider on Sunday to the one that was on track on the Friday. He saved his best for today. So yeah, great to see Acosta up there.
Acosta Day, part of the wider KTM package. Rebel KTM factory racing team manager Ake Ayu has been talking about a process, a change of working method to be able to improve results for most of the season. And it seems to be paying dividends because, Paul Espargaro came in, he was testing some components and felt a bit off on Saturday, finished, what was it, 8th? No, a little bit further than that in the sprint, but then managed to finish 8th today in the Grand Prix, improving on his result of 9th at the Red Bull Ring. So, 2 strong results. Brad Binder as well, looking pretty good. He managed to find some more improvement as well on the front end of the KTM RC16, and then managed to find more turning as well. He just had a slight problem with the rear end of the bike, which affected him in the braking zones, but then Binder coming through for his second successive 7th place finish. And then Enea Bastianini again, just looking incredibly feisty and a little bit sort of foolhardy with some of his decisions. Admittedly, he had a broken motorcycle in the sprint, which caused him to clatter into Johann Zarco. The Italian was spiffing about the double long lap penalty that he was awarded, and maybe got a little bit too anxious today and slid out, creating one of the talking points when it comes to the layouts of the Balaton Park circuit. But from your seat, Dave, at KTM, I think one of the little storylines going on in 2025 MotoGP is that the Austrians and the Italians of Aprilia are having a little bit of a war behind Ducati for the manufacturer's sort of best bragging rights.
Yeah, no, I mean, KTM have done really well. And we've seen this before. We've seen it in Austria. I've been saying it for the past few races. The start of the season, you'd go down to pit lane and you'd see 4 completely different KTMs. Now, since maybe Mugello-ish, you go down to the pit lane and all 4 bikes are the same. They have a direction, and because they're able to follow a development direction, they've got this stability. They're working with the rear stability as well. I think they had like an aero upgrade on the tail, which helps with braking stability. It's just everything is pointing in the right direction. Also, Pedro, again, we've talked about before, Pedro has got he's sorted his head out in the sense that he's not, looking longingly at the VR46 garage and wishing he could be on a Ducati. He's realised he can't go, so he's just knuckling down, getting to work, and trying to make the best of what he's got. And fair play to him. He's doing a really, really outstanding job. But, like Brad Binder has had a miserable year, and yet he is starting to make very, very slow progress in the right direction.
Yeah, I think you look at this track and the layout, and I mean, it is a bit Mickey Mouse in places. It is a bit of a go-kart track, and you think of where Pedro does a lot of his training in Murcia. I think it's called the Fortuna circuit, where he rides all sorts of different motorcycles there, and it's quite small and hokey, and the layout maybe is a little bit similar to what we have here. You wonder if that sort of played into his favor as well. But yeah, just another thing, fun Pedro is back. Basically, a Pedro that's giving you headlines and giving you good quotes in his debrief is back, and that's certainly a welcome return. We have mentioned this a few times in recent races, but yeah, it just seems like he has accepted where he is and is happy to be there. He might not be happy to be getting beaten by Marc Marquez every week, but what we can see of him is a sort of more content person, I think, and that's obviously been reflected in the results.
To talk about that evolution, as well as these mysterious forks from WB suspension, we spoke to his crew chief. So here's Paul Trevathan. Paul, many congratulations. A second podium in 3 GPs, personal best for the season as well. But Pedro was explaining that you guys had a late night last night.
Yeah, we didn't quite have the day that we wanted yesterday. I mean, after Friday, we were looking really strong. Really, I mean, to be honest, if you go back maybe 5 or 6 races, he's coming. He's putting things together in a lot of better way. And then after a good Friday, new track, and then we kind of asked him to do just put it together in the session, and then we lost that the first run, and we destroyed the bike. In all fairness, so we actually went into the sprint race with one bike. It was so much destroyed that we need to make the race bike ready, plus try to build a bike from scratch. So the only thing we could really use was the engine. So it was a big job, and then the boys worked super hard last night. When you get to see their eyes really deep in their sockets, but there's still a smile on the face, then you know that you've got a good team. So it was definitely a late night, and putting 2 bikes together, and yeah. But anyway, Pedro repaid them really well today. So nothing to say.
Well, yesterday Pedro was saying, one of the parts lost on the bike was the forks, the WB suspension. He says he really prefers that kind of setting. But then today, I mean, he was super competitive. So what's kind of the difference between the ones he lost and the ones he had on the bike?
Yeah, I mean, it's, these guys are so peculiar in the way they ride and the feeling, the feedback they have, And then WP have done a massively unbelievable good job in the last couple of years. They've really upped their game and made some fantastic performance gains. They come up with a new thing this year, and then there wasn't enough stuff to really. It was a test item. When he tested it, he was like, "Oh, this I really, really like." So we were forced to, because of him, we were forced to use it, but we only always had one set. Right. And so this has always been an issue for the last few races, and it's something that he really responded to really well, suited his riding style. So then once we ticked it off, they said, okay, we can produce more, but there's always a timeline, And then, to be honest, he's wanted it in his bike every time he rode it. He will live with it in FP1 if he got 1-on-1, but we started, when we found it, we said, okay, let's do FP1 without, and then we put it in for PR because there's only one set. that didn't go down so well. We did it for a couple of races. He said, look, just put it on the second bike, and then when I jump to that one, then I will have that feeling into PR. So for him, it's a big step. And then losing it yesterday, he come in and the first thing he said was sorry to everybody. When he saw the bike, he knew what he lost. So I guess, Pedro being Pedro, he's going to explain it to you. But in performance, it's probably more feeling than performance. You know what I mean? Yeah. But it's that feeling, that feedback that, when you're right on the limit, you find, especially time attacks, I think, probably more than the race situation. But we put it out of the head and we said, okay, it's gone. It's the stuff is coming soon, so this is going to be fine. But, when you find that little thing and then the rider loses it, it's like, yeah. But anyway, it's fine. It's fine.
Well, as ever, thanks ever so much for your time.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.
Ducati, Dave. We kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but Graham Barr, Nick Saban, and Morgan Caldwell, our listeners, said, should we be talking about a bit of a crisis at the Italian firm if it wasn't for Marc Marquez? Are we starting to see a changing of the guard? Maybe it's a little bit too radical to go in this direction, because if you look at the top of the championship standings, it's quite revealing, it's quite concrete. And, MotoGP has been in the stranglehold of Borgo Panigale for quite some time. But are there signs of some kind of chink in the red fairing there?
I wouldn't say that it's a crisis at Ducati. What I would say is that KTM, Aprilia, Honda as well. I mean, Honda had a really good weekend. They had a really good weekend in Austria. Marini looks really good. Joan Mir looks really good until he managed to crash again. So they're making progress. They're starting to catch up. I do think that the concession system is starting to work quite well, in that because Ducati can't test. They don't have the tyres. They don't have the wild cards. Also, again, we said this last year, with only 6 bikes instead of 8, that's less data. And that is a big hole in their strategy for developing and managing the bikes. They've only got 3 GP25s instead of 4 factory bikes like they had last year. That again is it. So I think that what's happening is there is a chunk of Ducati's advantage which has gone missing, and I do think also the GP25 is not clearly a better bike. It's not the way that the GP24 was so much better than the GP23. I'm not even sure that it's as good as the GP24. They went sort of in a bit of a weird direction, also because they bought this new engine that they thought that was going to be better, and then both Bagnaia and Marquez rejected it because it was really bad for engine braking, and so they've had to sort of reconfigure things on the fly. Mark has been much better at managing that than Pecco is. Though Pecco said out today that he'd made a bit of a step. They'd made a big setup change, a really big setup change, and that seems to give him some confidence back. So no, is there a crisis? I wouldn't say that there's a crisis. I would say that just everyone else is catching up.
Neil, yeah. Adam Cole said, "Oh, sorry. Do you want to say something?"
Oh, no, I was just going to say it's also, I think, a consequence of the rider lineup that they have. Last year they had Marquez, Bagnaia, Martin and Bastianini, like 4 absolutely top level riders. And this year, they've obviously lost Martin and they've lost Bastianini. And I just don't think their roster of riders is quite as strong as last year as well. As good as Alex Marquez has been this year, he's never put a fully consistent MotoGP season together. And you could say the same of Morbidelli and Di Giannantonio. Fermin Aldeguer is obviously a rookie. So yeah, I think that's also a factor.
But then Aldeguer's performances, in the last couple of races have also shown that, the GP24 cannot be underestimated and, still deserves the acclaim that we can throw at it. But Adam Cole asks, what does the remainder of the season look like for Pecco? And Neil, we're in his debrief this afternoon here at the track, and he actually looked quite calm. He's looked a little bit like a frightened rabbit in media debriefs recently, just completely lost. Almost for words as much as like an explanation of what he's going through. But the radical setup that he didn't really go into detail on, he said, I think the word centimeters rather than millimeters. So it was quite radical in terms of what they adjusted. Worked again in the race today. And even though Bagnaia's result was pretty insignificant, it was something to give him some encouragement.
It shows you where Bagnaia was this weekend, that he was kind of happy with the 9th place. Like, it had been that bad prior to the Sunday. On Friday, he said, I'll be really surprised if we make it into the top 10, which is just quite a shocking thing for Pecco Bagnaia and the factory Ducati team to say after the last 3 or 4 years and what we've seen him do in that time. You kind of felt that he came here with like a sort of preconceived idea that it just wasn't going to be a good track for him, because previously been here with the Panigale, like all the other Ducati riders. And while he was fast with the Panigale, he saw that so many super heavy braking zones and braking areas have been his big weakness this year. And he was saying that. He said, I knew I was going to struggle coming here. And you just felt like that was sort of almost in his mind the entire day of Friday. And then we had this crazy side at the end of warm-up where he had some issue with his bike during warm-up. We cut to the onboard when he was doing a practice start, which he botched. And then it wasn't quite Marc Marquez giving his RCV the finger in Sachsenring 2023, but it was him showing intense displeasure to the watching world at his machine. You thought, my God, this is like a kind of like a meltdown. But to be fair, he did show something in the race. And 9th place, okay, it's so far from where we expect him to be, but considering how bad and how bleak Saturday was, how bleak Friday was, it was something of an improvement. And he gave us the impression that it was perhaps something to build on. However, we have been here before in 2025 when we thought Pecco Bagnaia is back, and it really hasn't proven to be the case.
The changes normally when you make a setup change, what you're doing it by millimeters. You would add a couple mil more preload or ride height or whatever. What this reminds me of is Casey Stoner, because Bagnaia said we're talking centimeters, more than a centimeter. What this reminds me of is Casey Stoner, 2010 again, with Christian Gabrini at the time, at Aragon. The first part of 2010, Stoner had a terrible season. And what they did was they ended up raising his seat by, I think 2 centimeters, which is huge. And it transformed him it completely transformed his season. I think he went on to win either the next 3 or 3 out of 4 or 5. It was all of a sudden it was, Casey is back. Casey is back to his old self. This may be that if they're making that kind of a step, and if, as what Pecco was saying was, look, I've got some of my confidence in braking back again. If it's that much of a change, then it could well be transformative. But as Neil said, we've been here before.
Let's move east across Italy. And we've been talking about challenges to Marc Marquez. Marco Bezzecchi finishing on the podium today, led the Grand Prix. It's been very strong of late. And Jorge Martin as well, arguably contender for Rider of the Day. I mean, it was a blistering performance. And Martin also debunking the notion that you can't overtake around this particular layout. More questions in from our listeners. Christoph Brunn and Hardy had a little salvo of inquiries saying, on what track do we think Martin has a shot at his first Aprilia podium? Is Bezzecchi on his way to second in the championship? And do we think that Aprilia will be the strongest factory team in the second half of 2025? Any strong feelings on those ones, guys?
It's a tough one. Bezzecchi is still a significant way behind Alex Marquez in the championship. I think he's 83 points back. That's a tall order to try and overturn that. But there's no question that he is the sort of second best rider in terms of recent form. Again, going back to TV Room Raccoon's calculations, he scored 103 points in the past 5 rounds from a possible 185. Mark is the only rider that scored more. And again, like Austria, it was not a brilliant Friday for Bezzecchi. Came through Q1, qualified in the front row, solid sprint, and then he's got this sort of habit at the moment of starting brilliantly and putting his head down and kind of gapping the field in the early laps. We saw it in Brno, we saw it in Austria, we saw it again here. And with the soft rear tire, he didn't quite have the performance in the second half of the race, but just another really consistent result. You just have to take your hat off to him. And will they be the strongest factory team in the second half of the year? Quite possibly. I mean, judging by Jorge Martin's performance, 3rd and 4th, they were the strongest factory team today. Maybe we'll actually have to switch out Ducati factory team in our fantasy teams, which have been there since day 0 of 2025, and stick to Aprilia.
Yeah, Jorge Martin was interesting, saying that he was asked, like, can you see that is the podium coming? And he sort of said, yeah, but I don't want to be thinking about podiums for the next two races. At Barcelona and Misano, it's still too early. I still have a lot to learn. He said they were still adjusting his handlebars on the grid. So again, he's still got a lot of catching up to do. But it was just a really, really just an outstanding race for him today. Really strong by Bezzecchi. Is it impossible to overtake here? It is impossible to overtake when you are more or less as fast as the rider ahead. There are tracks where you don't really need to be that much faster. But Martin was so much faster than everyone. He was 3, 4, 5 tenths faster than the riders ahead, and then it's easy to overtake. Then you do have just that much more advantage because you're getting off the corners that much faster and you're braking that much later, so you can actually pass. But that doesn't necessarily mean that this is a track where where it's easy to pass.
Yeah, and he's been saying that, I think we mentioned this in last week's show, he's kind of in Bezzecchi's position at the start of the year where the pace is there, but the qualifying performance or the performance with new tyres isn't. And he was saying on Saturday that the natural inclination when you go for a fast lap in qualifying is to ride to your limits, to push to the limits, to brake a little bit later and get on the gas a little bit earlier and really rag the sort of the doll, so to speak. But he said the Aprilia just doesn't quite respond to that. It needs to be ridden in a more smooth way, and it only responds when you are kind of more docile with it. And that's obviously it's not something that is his first nature. So, once he works that out, he will be formidable. You will expect him to work it out because, Martin is MotoGP's qualifying master. We've seen that over his entire Grand Prix career, and just super impressive. I liked how he said, I'm not going to put a date on a podium this year, but I will definitely get one in 2025. So that's kind of sounded like a date to me, Jorge, but still, a brilliant performance, and a performance that was reflected in our Rider of the Weekend poll over on our Patreon page. Jorge amassed 61% of the vote, with David Alonso actually surprisingly coming in second with 24%. So our Patreon backers also chimed in and believed that Jorge was the man of the weekend.
Yeah, fourth podium finish for his teammate Bezzecchi, who still, needs to brush up on his media training. But in terms of performing on the RSGP, outstanding. I mean, the results are there, and I think the question about whether they will be the strongest factory team for the rest of the season is a valid one, and it just needs Jorge to catch up. But I'm still pursuing the elusive base setting. Something that the Trackhouse boys have been looking for quite some time as well. Aprilia still, I think, a difficult manufacturer to read, but yes, signs of progress for sure. One other big talking point, Neil, Dave, is the state or what we found here for Balaton Park. I mean, it was something we were asking the riders about constantly throughout the weekend, their thoughts of it when they went on track walks or cycled around on Thursday, their first laps on Friday, when the temperatures were a little bit kind of lower. It got steadily hotter. I think today was the hottest day on track that we had. The temperatures kind of fluctuated throughout the 3 days, it has to be said, because it was quite breezy. Overall, Dave, I mean, you were quite sort of dubious about this track before the Grand Prix. Have you changed your opinion?
Nope. It's a great track for Moto2 and Moto3. We see this with there's a few tracks which are like this, where they're so slow and so tight, but they actually work really well for Moto3 and Moto2, where you've got longer braking distance, you've got less power. It's more of a natural motorcycle, if you like. But a more natural motorcycle to be riding at a track, rather than MotoGP machines, which are so bizarre with the aero and the ride height devices and more power than you can shake a stick at. So it's a terrible track for MotoGP. There was concerns about it being dangerous. I mean, we saw the Pedro Acosta's bike hitting the camera. We saw Enea Bastianini's bike running across the chicane. Unfortunately, there's a few tracks where that can happen. The good thing about what happened to Bastianini is that at that point they're going quite slow, so riders do have more time to react, to be able to get out of the way. But even then, he was quite lucky. The crash in front of the cameraman, that happens all the time as well. If the bike starts to tumble, it gets thrown up in the air. What they need is
a precedent, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. It's happened at Brno, it's happened at Jerez, it's happened in all sorts of places. Just put higher catch fences, and people hate catch fences because it does block the view a little bit. But at some point, you know, you have to accept that there's got to be a catch fence. But I didn't like the layout. I did think it was very good for Moto3 and Moto2. Moto2 was a cracking race. You know, I enjoyed Moto3 as well because, you know, it wasn't just all 20 riders and then the person who closes his eyes longest into the final corner wins. It was much more.
Although it was a bit of that.
There was. Yes, but you know, first of all, they'd separated the wheat from the chaff, so we had sort of basically the best riders, and it was I enjoyed the Moto2 and Moto3. I think it is a really good track for that for those classes.
The majority of the riders were, you know, they weren't scathing at all of the track. You know, I think they appreciated the challenge of it. And safety-wise, I honestly thought that the Bud International Circuit was a little bit more sketchy in terms of proximity of the walls. We can look at the Acosta accident. I think that was something very freaky, because if you look at the crash for Johan Zarco, that really showed how well gravel can work, because, you know, he kind of shuddered to a halt quite quickly and the bike started to flip, but then, you know, lost a lot of its kind of momentum and came to a rest as well. I think, you know, Bastianini was unlucky, but then Marc Marquez pointed out that, you know, we have similar kind of curves like in Circuit of the Americas where he crashed. You know, so Marini said it would be good to alter the trajectory of the chicane a little bit to prevent things like that. But yeah, it's, you know, I don't think you're really going to get sort of like a super safe place. I mean, maybe there's no excuse if you have a brand new facility. I mean, what Balaton Park is less than 2 years old. I don't know. My overall feeling that you know, it's a featureless track. I mean, there's no redeeming features, especially when you come, you know, the week after a place like Austria, you know, Red Bull Ring and Spielberg. I mean, the contrast is stark. There's a heavy Misano vibe to it, and you do feel a little bit like, what is the point of this Grand Prix? Because the circuit wasn't full to capacity. The fans sort of are squeezed into grandstands, so there's not many people around by the fences. We didn't have a massive sort of 60,000-70,000 crowd in attendance. Okay, we're coming back to Hungary for the first time this century, so maybe you have to build up what could be a very vibrant market for the sport. You know, I think you maybe have to give it more than 1 year. But yeah, Balaton Park, I think, you know, deservingly has the jury out on it, but I don't think it was as bad as people thought it was going to be.
One of the photographers called it Timu Misano, which I thought was quite apt. And it's like Misano, but without Curvoni. And, you know, without Curvoni, Misano is not all that great.
Yeah, I mean, we did have two good races on Sunday, and the MotoGP race was interesting, but there's no way that this is like a MotoGP level track. I mean, the fact that it's so narrow, and the fact that we've got 3 chicanes, but it's not just that the 3 chicanes. You can have like high speed chicanes, and it's fun. It can lead to great racing. It can be like spectacular to watch, like, you know, Mugello. But we're talking about such like slow, low gear corners. Just really disrupts the rhythm completely.
Yeah, but didn't people think that of Sachsenring, Neil? And Paulo Spargaro said the same thing in his debrief today. He said, you know, we have Sachsenring. He said that's even more awkward to ride, in his opinion.
Yeah, but Sachsenring's got the waterfall.
Kind of thing. Yeah. It's got its own kind of character as well, with like the corners that go left and left and left and left and left. That is something quite unique and quite different. Whereas here, I don't know, just watching the bikes on track, I just was sort of left with the impression like these bikes are like, it's kind of like watching big MotoGP machines on a karting track. I don't know, it just felt like they were far too big to be running around here. And it did make me think back to, through history, over the last like 20 or 30 years, to other tracks that have seemed quite unsuited to kind of premier class machinery or races. And there's not been too many of them, to be fair, in the last 20 or 30 years. Speaking with colleague Matt Burt, who's obviously been around the paddock a little longer than the rest of us, and he was saying that the kind of the early iteration of the Sachsenring circuit now, that I think had a very hokey kind of third and fourth sector in the years from 98 through to 2000. That was a bit of a go-kart track, and that was panned sort of across the board by the majority of the 500cc riders back in the day. And yeah, it reminded me a little bit of that. Yeah, the racing, okay, was better than expected, but I still don't think it's MotoGP level.
Yeah, things I liked. I liked the Hungarian enthusiasm for the Grand Prix. I mean, the organisation, the people here, very much into it. I mean, there was a big presence from a channel Network 4 TV. They had people everywhere. I think the traffic plan needs sorting. The Hungarian police seem to be plentiful in number, but not really doing much. It was pretty hectic trying to get in just from one sole roundabout. I think that needs to be analysed, especially if more people want to turn up for 2026. And one other thing, just a comment on the safety side of it. I think it was quite noticeable during the race that there's quite a few stones on the track from the gravel. I mean, it doesn't necessarily bother Marc Marquez. We've seen him do an amazing save at Jerez back in the day when he lost the rear end of the Honda, going through some gravel. But it is a bit sort of sketchy, and it actually looked like Jack Miller had his second crash when he clipped a stone. I wasn't at his debrief now, so I'm not sure if he commented on that. But maybe the attributes also for having sort of big chunky rolling gravel is if you see Alonso Lopez's crash in Moto2, that really slowed up the bike and stopped it sort of following him into sort of the barrier. And we can remember only too well what happened to the Circuit Catalunya when a motorcycle followed a rider to such an extent and velocity tragically with Louis Salom. So I think that the gravel did its job there. Moving on, the Paddock Pass podcast is backed by Pole Position Travel this year, and we've had a message from our friends over there. I'm just going to read it out to you now. Valencia is always the round with maximum buzz. The city comes alive, the paddock is a party, and the rumour mill is in top gear as teams begin the change to 2026 and say goodbyes. It all starts up again on Tuesday. Speaking of which, we'll be running a special tour to the MotoGP test for permanent pass paddock holders. Contact us if interested. Part of the draw, it has to be said about Valencia, is the huge support we and MotoGP fans have for the city following last year's disastrous floods. While our 3- and 4-star hotels were not affected, our 5-star hotel Caro in the heart of the old town was badly flooded. We're very keen to help in a small way by filling this wonderful living museum for the MotoGP race, and have thus reduced prices for the package. It still includes our VIP track shuttle, Friday opening party, and the awesome Sunday Witches Brew closing dinner. On Friday, we'll hold our traditional charity event with several riders and an auction for 2 Wheels for Life. If you're interested in attending Valencia in the special package, then contact sales@ppt.com to make an inquiry or book. Alternatively, have a look through the Pole Position Travel website. On to the final section of the podcast, guys, our hire and fire. Neil, who would you employ?
I would employ Paul Espargaro, who is here deputising for Maverick Vinales. And I'm not just shifting my fancy from one Spaniard riding for Tech 3 KTM to another. I swear. I really swear. But
we believe you.
Oh, yeah, fickle.
Yeah.
I was just so impressed by Paul's performance. For the second replacement ride in a row, we saw him step in at Brno, where he came away with 2 9th places. And yeah, he was 8th here today, beating Pecco Bagnaia and just back of Brad Binder, full-time factory KTM rider. Yeah, and obviously, Paul he was sort of forced out of a kind of permanent MotoGP seat by KTM, who obviously opted for Augusto Fernandez over him in 2024. But initially he sort of, was absolutely, well, he wasn't delighted with what happened. But after some months away from the sport, I think he came to appreciate what had happened and came to appreciate this new life. But he was saying this weekend that he just loves competing and he does want to compete more. And I think he is really pushing KTM to be a little more active in terms of some of the wildcard appearances he can make in 2026. It was interesting as well this weekend to learn that, from our colleagues at GP1 reporting that Paul has reached out and offered his services to Ducati and World Superbike in 2026, which would be a kind of a nicer calendar for him. But speaking to Paul and speaking to some people from his camp, I think an option where he could race more for KTM and MotoGP would also still be of interest. And he is still competitive. He's still a top 10 MotoGP rider. I still think he has plenty to give. So KTM have a real asset on their hands with him, and super impressed with what he did here this weekend.
My hire, apart from Teflon cameraman, Full
Wow.
props to Joao, who's become a bit of a viral MotoGP phenomenon. I'm going to nominate Luca Marini. A fantastic weekend for HRC. Well deserved. I mean, we've eulogized or we praised Luca for his contributions to explaining or giving insight to the minutiae of MotoGP, particularly when it comes to technical details as well as riding style. And it was a solid set of performances, both through the sprint on Saturday as well as the Grand Prix today. He said, hold the horsepower on saying that Honda have made a forward step, but he has been riding a new chassis, which gives him a little bit more feeling and confidence. We still have to see whether that can pay dividends when we get to Catalonia and that low grip surface. But, it was encouraging. It was refreshing. And I think it was also a boost to the whole HRC project that, Joan Mir has looked fast recently, of course, tumbled out today, but then Luca Marini again showing that Honda are making good strides, somewhat to the distaste of Johan Zarco, who said that HRC seems to be wanting to offer the Italian and the Spaniard a means to catch up. Maybe just the factory team has to have a little bit more glory, I want to say, perhaps that's the word, as opposed to a satellite setup. I'm not too sure. What was your view, Dave, briefly, because I know you follow Luca's progress keenly.
Yeah, obviously. No, I mean, like Marini, fantastic weekend. I can imagine why Zarco is sort of quite ticked off at all of this. But that's just the way it is. The factory boys get the stuff first if the factory thinks it's going to work. So yeah, but Marini's just been really, really solid and has helped move the whole thing along.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the last time that MotoGP went to a new track was India in 2023, and that just happened to be Honda's strongest weekend in that particular season as well. Marini does learn tracks very quickly. He said that that's one of his big strengths. He said actually he had learned Suzuka and was really competitive just before his big crash when he was testing there for the ADR back in May. And also, I think Honda, you often see this year, Marini and Mir very, very competitive in FP1. I think they're able to reach the limit of their bike quite quickly compared to some of the others who need to maybe fine-tune aspects of it a bit more. And the fact that we were new to this track potentially aided them in that as well. So I'm not going to say that this is like the new norm, but great to see Luca back up there and taking advantage of the circumstances this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, new track means nobody has any data, means everyone is starting from scratch, and that changes the entire equation. So maybe this is also a little bit of an outlier. We'll have to wait and see.
Who was your hire, Dave?
My hire is Jorge Martin. We've talked about him at length. He's really making huge progress. He also said, he's enjoying this role more of actually developing the bike rather than just sort of like getting on the Ducati and going out and winning. Yes, winning is great, but this was like more fulfilling. And to think that, gosh, when was it? Just maybe 2 months ago, it was, will he actually end up leaving Aprilia to go and ride a Honda? And now he's really settling in. And hats off to Aprilia as well, because I think that they have actually handled the situation quite well over the long term. They've worked towards the right conclusion, and Martin is just performing. I'm really looking forward to seeing him next year on the bike, because I think it could be really very exciting.
Firing. I would dispatch with shame, like I mentioned, the Hungarian police for sort of being very ineffective in guiding in the traffic, but also Enea Bastianini, fast, full of potential, but just showing some of those kind of rash decision making. Sometimes you could say, yes, he didn't really know that the bike had damaged that much before he hit Joan Zarco on Saturday, the crash as well today. He just has that sort of slightly reckless side, I think, that pops up, and Zarco was pretty unimpressed and referred to that as well. So not the finest weekend for Enea, and stopped a little bit of the upward trajectory he's been on, but he could be there in future races. We go to Barcelona next, as we mentioned, and that was also the scene of a pretty horrific test for Bastianini when he first got on the KTM and completely totaled one of the bikes at the end of last season. So it will be a good measure of what he's been able to do together with like his crew chief and the rest of the Tectoir team there. Neil, who draws your withering kind of assessment from this weekend?
Alex Marquez for the sort of fall off in performance that we previously mentioned over the past 4-5 rounds. That continued here. It was a messy weekend from Alex. He had that grid penalty given to him for some slightly careless riding at the end of practice on Friday. He admitted that he didn't gel with the track. This isn't really a track that plays into his strengths as a rider. But 14th after a crash down at turn 1 was just disappointing, really. And he was trying to take it in his stride. Understandably saying that over a long season of 22 rounds, these little slumps happen. And in Red Bull Ring and here, 2 back-to-back races, which he has historically never really liked. Well, he's never come out before, but he's never really got on with the Red Bull Ring either. So, yeah, this is maybe just, something that happens over a season, but it is still quite pronounced just how far he has fallen away. And I guess pressure will be on his shoulders of Barcelona to prove that he's not kind of reverting to the mean, that he can kind of recover that epic sort of form that we saw in the first part of the year. But yeah, Marquez for the younger Marquez for a pretty abject weekend.
Dave, before I ask you about your fire, I want to plead that you don't say me for the scores in the current Alpine Stars Paddock Pass Podcast Fantasy League. Does anyone have an update on that? Have I shifted any of my shame?
Well, you've scored some more points, Adam, but you're still down 2,293rd in 3,500 players. So you are, you're moving slowly out of the bottom third. So let's put it this way: you're not doing as badly as QPR. That's what I'll say.
We're nearly through.
Steve English is still leading the Paddock Pass podcast crew. He's in 83rd. Neil is 269th. I am firmly I'm approaching the top third with 1,079th. The top 3 are number 1 Pussy Racing, number 2 BWE Team, and number 3 Alpha Octane. Enough. Yes.
Did you say that Steve is 83rd?
He is 83rd. Yeah, exactly. Obviously, he's hired a better hacker than me.
Right. Okay. Well, if I'm being spared your firing, who are you gonna select for this Grand Prix?
I am going to select Carmelo Espeleta. Now, there's an awful lot of conspiracies about Carmelo being able to manipulate it and making sure that certain riders get in certain seats, but he couldn't prevent Marc Marquez from getting on a Ducati, and as a result, MotoGP is being absolutely stunk up by Marc Marquez just ruling the place and making everyone else look silly. I mean, Marc is genuinely making me question how good the rest of the field is. That is not good. Mark shouldn't be allowed to be on a Ducati because he is so much better than everyone else. Carmelo tried and failed, and that is deeply sad to me.
Dave, your tin hat has fallen off. If you can just recover it and put it back on, that'd be great. Okay, guys. Well, I think that's pretty much it. If people watch on YouTube and probably see that the sun has set. We're now in the darkness here at Balaton Park. We've got a weekend off before another back-to-back, Barcelona and Misano. Big congratulations, of course, to Marc Marquez and to David Alonso, and props as well to Maximo Quiles in what was an exciting Moto3 race. Some frighteningly talented youngsters as well coming through the pyramid. So everybody's got to keep a watch on their back. Neil, just very quickly sum up some of the gossip that's emerged, because it seems that Diogo Moreira is going to be going to Honda. The Moto2 World Championship leader is going to stay with his current team. And what's going to happen with Yamaha then?
Yeah, Manu Gonzalez is staying at Intact GP, and Jack Miller is going to stay at Pramac Yamaha for another season. Which
is the right thing to do, because they need someone with V4 experience to help. They need an experienced rider to help develop that bike. Alex Rins is struggling. Fabio Quartararo is brilliant and fast, but I'm not sure about his feedback. And they've got Toprak coming in, so they're much better off keeping it. It sounds like Miguel Oliveira will be becoming a test rider for Aprilia. Also good. A good move for him. At least he sort of stays in MotoGP. But yeah, things are going around. And I'm going to give a shout out to Colin Vire, because what was it?
Fifth place, I think.
Yeah, fourth or fifth. He had a fifth. He had a really solid run. I mean, David Alonso is clearly just absolutely class of the field. But yeah, for the first time, Colin Vire looked like Colin Vire. It was very, very impressive.
Neil, there were some clever clogs on the Patreon as well, who managed to get their predictions right this weekend.
Yeah, shout out to Jackie, Janice, Nick, Paul, Hardy, Arabiata 93, and Adam, who all went with the outlandish claim that Marc Marquez was going to come away with a double victory here. Shout out as well to Craig, VJ, Hardy, DJ, who correctly predicted that there would be 5 different manufacturers inside the top 10 this weekend. And we also asked our patrons how many times you would avoid Marco Bezzecchi's debrief this weekend, or debriefs this weekend, Adam. Can you tell us?
100% record.
Oh, well, I did see you in the press conference on Thursday.
Yeah, attendance or skiving off.
And Sunday as well.
Well, that's like a third, isn't it? Because he was one of 3 people in that event. So technically it's, I don't know, 2/3? What do 2/3 make?
Well, does
that constitute one yet?
Yeah, no one predicted that, although DJ did predict that you would attend one and then curse Bez's weekend. So, I think you still have to stay away. But Prilly will be paying you to steer clear in Barcelona.
I did like his withering, body language at some of the questions in the press conference. I thought there's the Bez we all love and admire. Goodness. Listen, guys, let's wrap the podcast with our grades. I'm going to go first. I'm going to say a 7.5. I'm going to go high because it was the first one. Of course, there's teething problems, as we kind of mentioned. I like that the weather was cool. The crowd were into it. It wasn't full, but the people that were here were into the Grand Prix. The paddock is kind of rough around the edges. They had sort of strange towers to route the cabling. But I think if this event can get busier, there were rumors in the press room that, we're going to be here again in 2026 within the Hungaroring, the site of the Formula One, which would probably rank as a circuit closest to a major city centre of all the calendar. If it does come onto MotoGP, it could be a source for the Grand Prix in 2027. So Hungary's made a, not a bad debut, I'd say. So that's my assessment. Dave, over to you.
It's a good job that I watched Moto2 and Moto3 because otherwise we would be in negative number territory. First half of the MotoGP race was pretty good, but then it got boring. So I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. The layout is terrible. The attendance was poor. You'd expect a bit more when you're getting the same sort of crowd size as Phillip Island. Phillip Island is the arse end of the world. So, the fact that 30,000 people spared turn up there is actually quite impressive. Balaton's lovely, and it's not that far from Budapest. Not particularly impressed with the track. I think there are much better tracks, but they did okay. And it does sound like we will, as I understand it, we are 100% going to Hungaroring in 2027 after the track has been upgraded and they've made it safe for the FIM.
Neil, what's your ranking?
Yeah, I'm going to go with 5 as well. We had some good racing today. MotoGP race was a lot more interesting than I thought it was going to be, but the layout's a bit crap. And while the facility is cool, there's been lots of really helpful staff working here. Pit buildings, media center, everything is up to standard. It's just not really a very inspiring venue. It's kind of just on the edge of like a motorway. It's flat. It's just like we're kind of in a car park, really. It's not quite like it's not quite like the scenes you get in Phillip Island when you turn left and you just see the sea ahead of you. It doesn't send shivers down your spine. And Hungary's got a lot going for it. We're an hour and a half away from Budapest, which is a fantastic city. Got to spend a bit of time there on the Tuesday before the race and the Wednesday. But yeah, just out here towards Balaton isn't. It didn't inspire me. So yeah, I'm going to give it a 5.
Yeah, I mean, the MotoGP race, better than expected. But then what we were expecting after the sprint race was something that was making us entirely suicidal. So, any form of interest whatsoever would have been better than what we were expecting. But fair play. First half of the race was pretty good.
Well, on that cheery note, we'll bring the podcast to an end. Don't forget to check out our show next week. We've got some really cool interviews that we've made recently at the circuit, so we'll be back online. Hopefully, Steve English will pop up and show his face. Otherwise, look on our Patreon channel. We've got some shows there. The note shows are worth it, just for our kind of reactions from the daily occurrences at the Grand Prix. Thank you to rental.com. Go and have a look at that website. And Pole Position Travel as well. They've got a special offer for that finale in Valencia if you're interested. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and we'll catch you again soon.